Hello, welcome back. This is Dr. Keisha Decree talking to you about Black women, resistance, and space. I have mentioned in a prior video that I was coming off a um, my diasporic love story where I spent time in 4 countries in 3 months: Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, and then Cuba. And I wanted to have a special um, episode to talk about my first 2 stops that were in Costa Rica and in a little bit of time in Panama. And the reason why this is a good, well, it's the first place, but I also brought along my kids. Ellis and Fletcher, shout out to my boys. They are 9 and 10, respectively, when we went to Costa Rica. And this video is about the 5 lessons that I learned in bringing kids on my Central American bopping trip. So buckle up. I'm also responding to a video by the Yarbros, which have a big following. It's a couple that is looking or scouting around to find where they want to move abroad. And they have a very splashy production in their one. I'm sorry, I'm reading, trying to have my notes, you know that they did a couple of months ago called They Left America for Good. And the Yarbros are interviewing I guess 4 sets of individuals and families who moved to different places. And so one woman moved to Thailand, an older couple moved to, well, people know our Black Utopia. They moved to Portugal. Another woman moved to Albania, and then a family moved their 2 kids, 2 dogs with them to Cape Town, South Africa. And so, it's about they left America for good, and they talked about their reasons. A lot of them were talking about financially, and it resonated. Everything they said resonated in terms of moving abroad for greater ease, for safety and security, for financial reasons in terms of a higher cost of living. And the one thing that I wanted to highlight is that they all did some scouting before they moved. And so that's what phase I'm in right now. I'm not ready to move right now. I have a family, and we have jobs and careers. But I know that we will eventually. And so the 4 countries, 3 months was a part of me just getting out, but it was also very intentional about finding a place that we could live. And I did go with my kids to Costa Rica, the Caribbean part of Costa Rica, in the towns called Cahuita, and then later in Puerto Viejo, in the Caribbean side in Limon province of Costa Rica. And I went there with the intentions of scouting. So this was all about scouting. And you know what? I remember, so the 5 lessons learned, I could have, I, I could not have effectively scouted if I didn't bring my family. Right. Like, for me, my needs are relatively simple and small. I need Wi-Fi and and some fruit and some bread. I mean, I don't need much. But bringing your family and living there for an extended period of time is what I recommend that people do if they have the money and the means to do it, because you get a real sense of what a country is like before you just decide to pick one. So as they talked about the list in the Yarbrough episode, we all have a list. But in order to test that list, there's so much research that you can do before you get there on the ground. And there is nothing like being on the ground for some people. I attended an Exodus Summit in the last conference, and some were saying you should spend at least 2 weeks, if you can. All ain't able, but you should spend at least 2 weeks in a country to get a sense of comparing to being on the ground and being in on your list. And for me, if you're traveling with kids, if you plan to settle in another country with kids, you need to bring them too. Because, like I said, I had been to this actual place. I went to a retreat there the summer before, in the summer of 2024. And I knew, I was like, I got to come back here. This is the place that I want to scout with my family. And when I went there for a retreat, I didn't worry about food, I didn't worry about activities. It was all gravy. But when we got there in October of 2024, I was on my own. So the hubs came down with us, but he had to go back to upstate New York to work. And so I was on my own for the next 5 weeks with them. And so let me talk about the lessons learned. Okay. So number one, nix your vacation mindset. Okay. You are not a tourist. You will not, like when I went the last time, you will not have your meals planned and you will not have an itinerary that someone made for you. And it was hard. It was hard for the kids, especially. I knew rationally, I knew what I was doing. I wanted to be in a place, and I wanted to see what it was like to live there. But the kids were like, okay, we have suitcases, we're on vacation. And that was really hard when I got to the next lesson learned about coming up about, education and educating your kid if you are scouting. So you really have to, plan to stay at a place. So no hotels if you can. No, yeah, you need to find a place to rent. If you want to book an Airbnb, you need to stay in a place that's not all touristy, but fairly residential, close to what you need to be next to, whether it's a school, whether it's a worship place, something as practical as the bus station, something as practical as the grocery store. So you want to live as if you're going to be there. So that was very hard for my kids to understand. And it was actually our challenge that I'll get to in a minute, because they thought they were on vacation. But really integrate yourself and try to plan days. Yeah, you can go on tours, but you're not going to be, on tours and on a catamaran. You want to need to know what your daily life and you try to make it as similar as possible as the life that you want to live there. That's why, you need the grocery store. You need to know where the bus stop is if you're going to be getting around or find a way to get around. So that's really something that's small, but very important about nixing the vacation mindset. Cool. We're going to get back to that because my kids didn't do that at all. And it was a problem. Number two, and I talked about it in videos before, is that before you even get there, you need to begin the kind of community building, the landing building. So I had the privilege of going to Cahuita before I brought my kids. And so when I told the organizer about, oh, I really want to look at this area, she was able to introduce me to other expats at the time. And I began to correspond with them after I left, knowing that I would come back. Not sure of the dates, but knew I would come back. I joined the Facebook group, as I had suggested before, if you're traveling. And so when I came down with my family, we already had dinners planned with other expats, other families. So that was really, really beneficial. When I'm on the expat sites, I see people like, oh, hi, me and my family are here. What are y'all doing? And I'm like, some people are really, really nice and they might meet you, but that's the pre-planning is best in that regard, to say, I'm going to be here then, write to the group and say, we're coming next month, and then make plans so that you're not hoping that someone is free on that time that you're there. So pre-planning is really key. And it was essential, again, for knowing and it not being a vacation. Like when you're a tourist, you don't worry about that, right? But if you're going to live there and try to have the intention to build roots, it really is incumbent upon you to Try to meet folks, talk to people, and have some people that you know on the ground. You'll meet others because you'll meet others through them in interacting and socializing for the weeks and months that you're there. Um, Number three. So we've talked about mix the vacation mindset, right? And prep, pre-community building before you land. And this gets back to the problem with the kids' transition. Well, part of my urgency in wanting to move now rather than when I retire later is that my um I don't want to wait like some people until my kids are finished high school or until I'm an empty nester. I really want to move now. And so I was committed to bringing my kids. But if you're committed to bringing your kids with you to another country for over, more than 2 weeks, then you need to create an education plan for them. Well, my lesson learned was that homeschool is not what I thought it was. So my kids go to a regular public school here, upstate New York. And the only thing I knew about homeschooling, the only experience I had was when they were home during the pandemic. And that was absolutely positively awful. And, and so I desperately did not want to homeschool because that was my opinion of homeschooling, which is false, right? Like that was under the most extreme circumstances, but that's all I knew. But I worked with their teachers to get their lesson plans. The school actually required me to officially say that I was homeschooling them, even though I was going to return. We were leaving a few weeks into the start of the semester, and the plan was to come back mid-November. And so we would miss most of the first marking period, and we would be well into a third of the second marking period. And for that long, they couldn't have them absent for state regulations. So I had to formally apply for a homeschool or to do the paperwork for a homeschool. But I had their materials with me. So I was so afraid because all I knew in my mind was what COVID was like. And that was a disaster. At the time, one was entering kindergarten and the other one was in first grade. And I was working full time. Like it was just a disaster. And so I talk to the teachers, talk to their counselor, and inside I was slowly dying because I didn't know how I was going to pull this off. And so I overcompensated. I completely overcompensated because I had their workbooks. I then realized that they could be in a homeschool pod throughout school. I'm not advertising. Outschool is not paying me. I'm sure there's other arrangements, but I found a pod. I found a group operating out of Florida who had study groups of kids remotely that met as a classroom. So I had to have a fourth grade pod and a fifth grade pod. And these kids were all remote, different parts of the United States. They were all in the United States. And they met as a classroom with one teacher and they went over their ELA. They had games. It was really great. And they met, I think it was 40 minutes a day, Monday through Thursday. So, and then they would have homework to do. And so I had that work, and then I popped the out school home pods on top of that. And then because I really overdid it, and it was really because of my fear of like having these kids look at me and expect me to teach them and feed them and clothe them and cook. So I ended up connecting with an expat who was a unschooler. She had a child around the same age, and so they ended up going with her Thursday, I think like 2 afternoons a week. So I put this stuff together And I overdid it with the traditional school, the pod school, and then these kind of interactive in-person engagement in the afternoons, because I was kind of terrified of them not being engaged and them behind. I didn't have to do that. And next time when we go, because we're going to go scout some more, I think that I'm going to go with the out school, depending on the kind of year. I didn't need to have 3. So that was a lesson learned. It's not like the pandemic. And some might ask, well, why didn't you just, and I did, why didn't you just put them in the school? Because we were going to originally we want to stay for a month. Why didn't you put them in school? And I thought about that, but we were going to a Spanish speaking country and my kids don't know Spanish. I'm bilingual, but they weren't. And so I didn't feel like we weren't be there a long enough time for them to be able to pick up enough of the language enough to learn. So I didn't bother with that. I thought that would be too disruptive, that they were in a public school in the US, down in a Spanish speaking public school for a month and a half and then back. I wanted them to have a continuity with curriculum and everything. But yeah, I went at it a little bit wrong. I overcompensated. And I think that it can be easier. And maybe my next scouting is in the summer and I don't have to worry about that. But I mean, they still need engagement. But that was really interesting. Related to time. So number 4 is the lesson learned is more time, more sense of understanding. More time on the ground is always better. So remember I said that the minimum is 2 weeks. And that's what's recommended. It's not just, I didn't make that up. I heard it and I'm repeating it, that the minimum is 2 weeks. A number of the people in the Yarborough's video, the couple in Africa, they spent 45 days. The woman who ended up settling in Bangkok, she spent a couple of months. But if you have, the more time that you have, if you have the privilege of doing it, the more it's better. And I can tell you exactly why this lesson is really important. So when we got there, it was not rainy season, or had just shifted from dry to rainy season. And you hear about rainy season, but as an American, you're like, okay, it rains, and it rains. But as we stayed longer, we saw what it meant to be rainy season. We had rains and it was normal and it was hard and then it would go away. But towards the end, so about 4 weeks in, we saw what the effects of like these heavy deluge could do to the ground. And by the last week we were there, we were staying primarily in Cahuita, and then we stayed for a couple of days in Puerto Viejo because a lot of our friends ended up being on that about, and Puerto Viejo is about a 30-minute drive with relatively stable traffic. The traffic is bad sometimes. And so we stayed over there. And by that last 2 nights, the rains were so heavy that it was difficult to get around. Walking, driving. We stayed off of the main road, and I would walk up to the main road for coffee or whatever. And you had to dodge a lot of water. And then one night, I don't want to tell this story. It's too long. But one night, my kids went over for their like afternoon interactive tutoring crafting session during a rainstorm. And my driver, I didn't have a car. We had gotten so comfortable that I would ride over with them, leave them, and then ride back home to get my couple of hours of child-free time. Wonderful. And then one night it rained, and the driver was like, "I can't go back. It's just too much water. My lawn is full, and I can't go back." And I went into panic mode. I was like, my kids are left over there. But the story ends well. I ended up another person who I had relied on for transportation. He actually went to pick them up, and I usually relied on him, and I had a new person that night because he couldn't do it, but he ended up getting them, and I was a mess. I was a mess that night. But you know what? I know when someone says rainy season that it shouldn't be taken lightly. And if we had stayed for our 2 weeks, if we had stayed for a month, even if we had stayed only and saw that what it meant to be there during one particular time, then I would have learned the harder way if we had tended to stay and not realize. So you get into scenarios where, okay, this is what they're talking about. So rainy season, you got to worry about that. If it rains a certain amount of time, that is a great concern about navigating your way, or even if you aren't driving, what it means for others in terms of rainy season. So the lesson was a valuable lesson. Um, I was scared for about 30 minutes. But again, the other stuff, the lessons I learned in terms of having community, I was able to get on the phone and call and get someone else. But I was in a bit of a panic, and that panic was just me being alone. I was anxious. Um, but lesson learned. And then the final lesson, because if I didn't make you anxious enough, and this was not to say, oh my God, don't do it. It's like, for me, it's not that you don't do it, it's that you do it. And as number 5 says, go with the flow. Okay. I am a type A individual. And a type A individual deciding to go and bring their school age kids to another country for a month. Um, my anxiety came in overpacking, and I'm really good when we travel. I'm a very good packer. But when I'm tasked with having my kids for a month somewhere and in a relatively remote place, if we were in San Jose, I wouldn't have worried, but we were in a fairly rural place. There's no big box stores or anything, not in the town. This is a kind of fairly rural um, beach community. So it also depends on where you are. And so I kind of overcompensated in many ways. The packing, I left a lot of stuff there. Some people were gifted with some wonderful things. And like having not one, not two, but 3 plans to keep my kids engaged academically. But I did open myself up for the most part to enjoy and to be at peace. We went on a tour the first week with when everybody was down, and the last couple of days I booked something. We went to the Jaguar Rescue Center in Puerto Viejo. That hint, they don't have jaguars, but I'll let you get that story. But yeah, I was there to live. I wasn't a tourist like my first one. The vacay mindset was gone. And I wanted to be like, I need to wake up. Where am I going to do my work? I found a great coffee shop, great Wi-Fi. It was lovely. I had anticipated going to the beach every day. We did not go to the beach that much, which was really interesting because in my list, I would have said I wanted to be able to see the water. I want to be able to hear the water. I imagine myself walking to the water every day. And that didn't really manifest itself that way. But I went with the flow. I did. So the manic was the prep. But once I was there and I had community, my lesson learned, when I went with the flow, I allowed myself to be open for whatever possibilities happen. And examples were, we the boys, I knew they were going to ride the bikes. We had bikes at our Airbnb. We had bikes there. We had 2. And so I rented an additional bike and we went bike riding. I have never done that with my kids. We went for a bike ride. It was frightening for me, but they loved the idea of bike riding, and we would stop. We biked around the area and was able to see things. It was awesome. A friend was like, let's go to Limon, which is like the bigger city. Let's go to Limon for a parade. I didn't know that there was a parade, and we all jumped on the MPP bus, the public bus, and went down, and it was great. So I saw on Facebook that some other expats were gonna have like we were gonna go trick or treating on the main strip. And so I was like, let's put together some kind of costumes, guys, and let's go trick or treating. And so, you know, don't, this is not your vacation, right? So you have to leave the space open to do things with the community building. And you can, do things that you didn't know that you would like. So I really appreciated that. And I'm thinking maybe I should ride my bike with my kids up here at a park without cars, maybe. So those are my lessons learned from Cahuita. And you're probably saying, well, Keisha, you did your scouting. Is that a place that you want to live and want to go? Maybe. It's not necessarily at the top of my list anymore. Primarily because of the cost of living. Um, talking to others, talking to locals, talking to expats, it's Costa Rica in and of itself is probably the most expensive country in Central America to live. It's still not living in, New York and California, right? Or any major city. But it's not as low as I would need to go as someone who has a family. I need to be able to cover expenses for a family of four, and I'm not retired, right? So it's still on the list. It's a beautiful place. And as I mentioned before, um, what I was able when I go with the flow and listen to the stories and listen to the people and realizing how much the Afro diasporic influences are there, how many my on my list is to be in a place that had a predominantly Black presence. So it met a lot, it checked a lot of the boxes, but it actually opened me up to like, where should we scout next? Like, okay, we did this. I learned these 5 lessons on how to do this. I'm going to feel more comfortable when we do this again. But now I'm just like, I think I want to scout. I think I want to date. I think I want a country date. So at this point, in my next steps, I'm looking at where I'd like to bring my family next for an extended stay, for where and for when. So I'm thinking about Mexico, like Veracruz area. That's the one predominantly Black place. Have you been to Veracruz? Veracruz? Um, and I definitely came out looking at Colombia. And I'll talk about Colombia in another video because that wasn't with the kids. That was a wonderful child-free one with me and my husband, and we went to Cartagena. So yeah, even talking with when we were going to Panama, um, I ended up talking a lot with the driver. he was born he was born in Costa Rica. He was the one that told me that was the most expensive Latin America. He was born in Costa Rica, raised in Costa Rica, and because of the cost of living, he actually moved um to Panama, which is on the border, to Panama. And he was sharing with me that I should look into Colombia. So I think I'm gonna scout Mexico and scout Colombia, specifically around Veracruz. I have a friend who loves San Miguel de Allende, Querétaro. And in Colombia, I'm looking at Medellin, Cartagena again. Again, we were there for a vacation. I did not scout it. So I like this. This is my first country scouting experience. It had its challenges, but I have these lessons learned, and I'm actually come out of it not more certain about the place we want it to be, but definitely certain about scouting and taking the time to just scout and to get a feel of places. So that's what I'm coming out of this all feeling confident about. So I hope this helped you. Are you thinking about scouting? What are the places that you're thinking about scouting? Have you been to Veracruz? Have you been to parts of Colombia? Am I missing a place that you went that you think would be very family friendly? Let me know in the comments. And always, if you like what I'm talking about, please like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, bye.